Hello everyone, welcome to NUA's Caregiver Empowerment Programme. This workshop and webinar is the functions of an individual's behaviour, part one of a two-part series. So welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lorna. I'm a behaviour specialist working with NUA and I will be talking with you about the functions of an individual's behaviour. In today's webinar, we'll be covering the functions of an individual's behaviour. So individuals with additional needs may demonstrate difficulties with communication and emotional regulation. This can often result in frustration and behaviours of concern. So in part one of this two-part series, we will explore how understanding the functions of behaviours of concern and the contributory role of emotional regulation and communication difficulties can help caregivers to support individuals with additional needs. In the second part of this two-part series, we will aim to provide some strategies for recognising early warning signs for behaviours of concern, and also ways in which we can prompt alternative behaviours that will meet the same function for the individual in a safer or a more appropriate way. So an overview of the content that we'll be covering in part one. In part one, we'll be covering why do we behave, the four main functions of behaviour, understanding the role of communication difficulties in contributing to behaviours of concern, understanding the role of emotional regulation difficulties, again, in contributing to behaviours of concern, and understanding triggers, setting events, and precursor behaviours. In part two of this series, we'll look at practical, proactive strategies to reduce behaviours of concern, environmental considerations when we're looking at behaviours of concern, teaching new skills to try and replace behaviours of concern with functional alternatives for the individual, reinforcement and the power of reinforcement in changing behaviour, things that can help when the individual is emotionally dysregulated, and we'll finish then with a summary. Our first topic is looking at why do we behave. The functions of behaviour basically explain this. Why do we behave? Behaviours are maintained by their consequences. So this means that when we like the consequence of a behaviour, we are more likely to do it again in the future. When we don't like the consequence of a behaviour, we are less likely to do it again. We call this way of selecting a particular behaviour in order to achieve a particular consequence the function of the behaviour. So the why of the behaviour. Why does the behaviour happen? What do we get and what do we avoid by doing this behaviour? When we understand this function of a behaviour of concern, we know what strategies can be used to support the individual engaging in these behaviours. We can also teach the person other ways that meet the same function, but in an appropriate way. So what are the functions of behaviour? The vast majority of human behaviours function to meet one or a combination of the following needs. The first is to gain attention, and it's important to remember that this attention might be positive, so positive praise, for example, or negative, so a reprimand. When somebody is engaging in behaviour to gain attention, this can be positive attention or negative attention. The second function is to escape or avoid a situation or activity. The third function is to gain access to tangible items, such as food, activities, or things that the individual likes. And the fourth is automatic or sensory. So this includes coping with pain, providing sensory stimulation and seeking sensory stimulation, and also the management of strong emotions. All of these needs are valid, so these are needs that we all have, but sometimes the way of getting the need met is problematic, particularly when we're looking at behaviours of concern. So if a behaviour of concern is leading to somebody gaining what they're looking for, then this causes the behaviour to maintain over time. So our second topic then is looking at these four main functions of behaviour in a little bit more depth. Attention. So as I explained previously, behaviour may communicate a desire to gain attention. So attention can be something as simple as eye contact, being told don't do that, annoying a sibling and getting a reaction, or checking if somebody is okay after a fall. Attention can be both positive and negative. So for example, being asked to stop it or receiving comfort. Some examples of attention are hitting a parent and being told to stop. So in this scenario, if the individual is not receiving attention at that moment in time and is seeking attention from their parent but might not have another way to communicate that need, then hitting their parent and receiving that attention, even though the attention is negative and being told to stop, can cause the behaviour to maintain over time because the need of the individual has been met. So that need for attention has been met through that interaction, and therefore that will cause the behaviour to continue over time. Crying and receiving comfort from a caregiver. So again, in this example, if an individual is crying, they're receiving comfort from a caregiver, they might learn, I cry, I get more attention, or I cry and I get a different type of attention. So again, the need for that individual to gain attention might result in that crying behavior becoming more frequent over time, because again, when we're looking at the functions of behavior, it's to get that need met. The last one then, annoying a sibling and being told to stop. So again, not having attention or not having attention of the parents at the time, engaging in those behaviors with the sibling, so annoying the sibling, getting them a little bit frustrated, can then lead to the parental attention being directed back to that situation in order to tell the children or the child to stop, which results in the child receiving that attention. Again, even though it's not necessarily positive attention, it's still enough to make that association between I do this, so I annoy my sibling and I get attention. So if the individual's need is to gain attention and they're looking for attention in that time period, then engaging in that behavior is more likely over time because they've learned, I annoy my sibling and I get attention. So when we're looking at escape and avoidance behaviours, these are behaviours that may also communicate a desire to escape or avoid specific situations. So certain activities or tasks that the person doesn't want to do, certain people or places that the person doesn't want to encounter, and so on and so forth. This kind of behaviour may happen after the non-preferred stimulus, so the thing that they don't like becomes present in the environment. It may also happen before the non-preferred stimulus is present, but that experience has taught them that it's imminent. So for example, a bell sounding the start of the school day or a dentist appointment on a calendar can be a stimulus to indicate that a negative or non-preferred activity is about to start. So the person then may behave in ways to avoid this stimulus. So the stimulus that has been associated with that, so for example, a bell sounding for the start of the school day, can indicate, okay, this is going to start, I don't want it to start, so the person might start avoiding those situations. So for example, pretending to be sick in order to avoid having to do a test at school. So I think this is something most people can probably empathize with, is really trying your hardest to get out of doing something that you don't want to do. So tests in school, being stressful, pretending to be sick in order to avoid having to do this. And again, if that gets reinforced, i.e. the person escapes the test and gets to stay at home, they're more likely to try in future to pretend to be sick in order to have to avoid doing more tests in the future, because that behaviour has been established and that connection has been established. Pushing over the table during meal times in order to remove the instruction to eat. So if somebody has feeding difficulties or has sensitivity to certain food types or avoids certain food types, if that food is presented to them, then they may engage in behaviours of concern to try and get that away from them. So if somebody doesn't like eating broccoli, for example, and you present broccoli on a plate in front of them, they might be likely to try and escape that. So again, kicking the table over might result in the removal of the broccoli or the removal of the individual from the kitchen or the dining room table. Therefore, they've learned, I kick over the table, I get removed, or the stimulus gets removed. Therefore, that behaviour is effective at getting my need met. Therefore, it's more likely to happen again going forward. Hitting a peer in order to be asked to leave the classroom. So again, I suppose the removal of individuals from classrooms can sometimes be used in order to negate situations, or historically may have been used to negate situations in which there's peer-to-peer conflict. So, again, what the individual might learn is, I hit my peer, I get removed from class, I don't want to be here, so I'm going to hit my peer in order for me to be removed from class. So again, that connection and that association between that behaviour of hitting and the consequence of escape or avoidance of that situation has been established there and is more likely to continue into the future. Tangible. So this behaviour may also seek to communicate a desire to gain access to an item or an activity. This could be food, money, toys, going on excursions to the cinema, park, swimming pool, and the list goes on. Some examples that we can work through here are kicking another child in order to get an item that they would like. So for example, my friend is playing with the Lego blocks. I really want the Lego blocks. I'm trying to get the Lego blocks from my friend. They're saying, no, I want to play with them. So I kick them and they give me the item that I'm looking for. They give me my Lego. What I've learned there in that situation is I've been told no, I kick, and therefore I get what I've been looking for. So that, again, association between getting access to an item or a tangible has been established because my behaviour has been effective at getting my need met. Refusing dinner in order to gain access to a treat. So again, this might be another common one that we'd see at the kitchen table. I've been given my plate with broccoli, chicken, potatoes, but I would prefer my chocolate ice cream. So I'm going to refuse to eat my dinner in order to get chocolate ice cream or to get offered an alternative. So it might not be my chicken, potatoes, broccoli. It might be a slice of toast or something that I prefer. So I refuse to eat. And then as a result of that, I get offered an alternative. Crying when an iPad is removed in order to gain access to the iPad again. This is something that's extremely common. iPads are very stimulating, they're very engaging, they're highly preferred by children and adults. So again, the removal of them can be quite a negative experience for individuals, particularly individuals who engage in behaviours of concern and who may have communication and emotional regulation difficulties. So when something is removed and I cry and therefore somebody gives me the iPad back to try and make me feel better or make me stop engaging in that behaviour of crying, what I might be learning as a result of that is I cry and I get back what I've lost. So somebody takes something away, I cry, and it's given back to me again. So therefore, again, when we're looking at the associations that might be built up between that, I cry and I get something back has been an effective way of getting my need met. Therefore, I might be more likely to engage in that behaviour going forward. And this falls again under the tangibles. So gaining access to something tangible, gaining access to the iPad or gaining access to a treat, that function has been established for my behaviour. So the last function that we look at then is automatic or sensory behaviour. Our behaviour can provide a form of sensory stimulation to the individual. This is generally things that feel good through any of our physical senses, such as movement, sounds, smells, sight, etc. An individual can also engage in certain behaviours to manage their internal events. So these are things that we can't see, but that the person is experiencing, including pain or really strong emotions. These behaviours are not affected by any social consequence, but they are maintained by consequences that are internal to the person. So these behaviours, again, are more internalized behaviours in comparison with the behaviours that we've looked at previously. So these are things, if we see somebody picking at the skin on their fingers until it bleeds due to the feeling that they provide, so they might again like the feeling of picking at their skin. This again gives them some form of sensory or automatic reinforcement or sensory or automatic nice feeling that causes this behavior to maintain over time. So they are enjoying the sensation and therefore they're more likely to continue to engage in that behavior as a result of that internal feeling of enjoyment. Somebody who might throw things around and break them in order to release feelings of frustration or anger. So again, I'm feeling very heightened, I'm feeling very emotional, I'm feeling very frustrated. Breaking something or throwing things might help me release that in a way that calms me and makes me feel good. So again, my internal feelings of frustration might be negated by engaging in these behaviors of concern. So therefore, that link between throwing things or breaking things and reducing my internal frustration is what's causing that behavior to maintain over time. And another one then, a person that might pull their hair out due to the feeling that it provides. So again, this feels nice. I enjoy doing this. I enjoy the feeling and the sensation of pulling the hair out. So that can cause the behavior to maintain over time. So again, when we're looking at our automatic or sensory function, what we're looking at is the individual getting some internal sense or some internal feeling or enjoyment out of the behavior. Similarly, if somebody has pain, we might see behaviors emerge that indicate that the person is in pain also. So pain can be that underlying sensory feeling that leads to the person engaging in behaviors of concern, like throwing things around, for example, because internally they do not feel good. So our third topic then, we're going to look at understanding the role of communication difficulties when we're looking at the emergence and the maintenance of behaviours of concern. So understanding the role of communication difficulties, as adults, we tend to use verbal communication to get the majority of our needs met. So, for example, we can initiate social interactions when we want company or to get the attention of a shop assistant when we need help. So, I need help. I know that I can use my voice to go up to the shopkeeper or the shop assistant and ask them, can I have some help? Do you know where this is? So, my need there is their attention in order to help me to gain what I need. So when we're looking as adults, it's very easy for us to engage and to get our needs of having attention met through our verbal communication and through our body language and other social communication. For individuals with communication difficulties, this is obviously a lot more difficult. I can excuse myself or I can ask for a break when I don't want to do something. So, if somebody asks me, oh, Lorna, would you mind doing this? And I say, no, actually, I'm not feeling like that today. That's my way of verbally communicating again that I want to escape from that situation or I want to avoid it. You can tell people that we're not comfortable in a particular place. So if you're somewhere where it's very noisy, very loud, there's lots of crowds and you don't feel comfortable, again, you're able to discuss with people, I feel a little bit overwhelmed here. I think I want to go to a quieter place. So I'm avoiding that place through, again, my communication. As adults, we can ask for name or point to items that are out of our reach so that somebody else can get them for us. So again, looking for help. I want something that's on the top shelf. I can't reach it. I can turn to somebody and ask them to help me access that tangible item so that need is met. My need of access to tangibles, so that function, is met through my communication behaviour. And I can order food in a shop or in a restaurant or order clothes online again to get that need of access to tangibles met. When I feel unwell, I can make a doctor's appointment. We can have a massage when we feel pain, play music when we feel like listening to it, to engage our senses and feel good. We can express a range of difficult emotions to lessen the experience associated with them. So again, as adults and as people without communication difficulties, we are able to express a lot of these things in order to get our needs met across all of the functions: attention, avoidance, tangible, and automatic or sensory. So continuing on with understanding the role of communication difficulties, in addition, as adults, we have mastered the concept of time, and we've also, over our lifespan, developed the ability to wait. So we know that we may feel lonely or bored just now, but that we will be meeting our friends at the weekend. So our need for attention will be met at a later point, and we are okay with waiting because we have learned that that's okay. We may be struggling to maintain focus or motivation at work, but we know that work will finish at 5 o'clock. So we can wait for that opportunity to escape from that situation and have that need of escape met. We may feel hungry right now, but we know that dinner will be ready in 40 minutes. So we can wait for access to this tangible. We can wait again for that need of access to tangibles to be met. And when we feel frustrated or angry, we know that it will pass sooner or later. So we know that it's not permanent. We've developed that concept of time. We know that this isn't going to last forever. And we know that we will feel better again. And we also have lots of different things that we can do that will help with these feelings, called emotional regulation skills. So continuing again with the understanding the role of communication difficulties, these are not skills that we are born with. However, they are things that we have had to learn. So these are things that we've learned across our lifespans to help us cope, again, through interaction with others and through communication with others. So when small children know what they want but have not yet mastered the communication skills to calmly tell this to an adult, there can be a lot of frustration when their needs aren't quickly met. There can also be difficult emotional responses when requests are understood but can't be met immediately. Responses like in a while, not yet, maybe tomorrow can feel very aversive to a child who does not have a concept of time or the skills to wait. A little while may seem like an eternity, and they have no guarantee that tomorrow will even come. So they're called the terrible twos for a reason. Again, the terrible twos is a period of time developmentally for children where they are learning about their world and they have not yet learned and developed those skills of waiting and understanding time. So understanding that tomorrow is a couple of hours away, or understanding that dinner time is only 4 hours away. again, that might seem like an eternity to them. So they're not understanding this concept of time, which can build into the feelings of frustration and feelings of needs not being met that, again, can make behaviours of concern more likely to happen. So continuing again with understanding this role of communication difficulties, when a person has a disability or a neurodevelopmental disorder, difficulties with expressing these wishes and desires might continue indefinitely across the lifespan. So this is likely to be compounded by difficulties with receptive communication as well. So that's the ability to understand what is being said to us. A person with a disability or neurodevelopmental disorder may have trouble understanding what is being said to them, paying attention until the person speaking has finished what they're saying, remembering what was said to them, and acting on the information they were given. These difficulties all have the potential to create confusion and anxiety for the person who doesn't understand what is going on and doesn't have a functional way to express their needs. So when we look at expressive communication, again, being able to express appropriately that I want attention, or that I need to have something to eat right now, or that I'm looking to avoid or escape this situation, this can also be compounded, as we've just discussed, by receptive communication difficulty. So really understanding what people are saying. Again, if somebody is saying something within quite a long sentence, being able to decode that sentence and take the key take-home messages from that sentence as to what the person's day looks like, for example. So if we're, for example, trying to get the need of I want that chocolate bar met, and we're told, and we're somebody with a communication difficulty or a disability or neurodevelopmental disorder, and we're told you can't have that right now, but in a while we might be able to go to the shop and get you some more. That sentence is extremely long and very confusing, because it's saying no, but not really saying no, and delaying it until later, which again, in terms of the concept of time, is very difficult to understand for people with communication difficulties. So all of these combination of receptive and expressive communication difficulties can really lead to the emergence again of those behaviours of concern to try and get those needs met in a way that can't be expressed as adults would, or as people without a disability or neurodevelopmental disorder or communication difficulty would. Continuing again with understanding the role of communication difficulties, as we said earlier, behaviours are maintained by their consequences. So when a particular behaviour leads to an outcome that is perceived as good, it is more likely that the person will repeat that behaviour when they want that outcome again. When a child doesn't have the skills to meet their own needs or to ask for them to be met in ways that are safe or appropriate, they will try anything at all to get the need met. And this goes for adults as well. So any individuals that experience communication difficulties, when they don't have those communication skills to get those needs met, they can again try anything at all to get the need met, which often leads to the emergence of our behaviours of concern. When not one of these novel behaviours is effective in having that need met, the behaviour is what we call reinforced. So the person has received that positive outcome for that behaviour, and that makes it more likely to happen again in the future. So that's what the person is more likely to do the next time they have the same need. The behaviours that we are more likely to attend to and respond to are frequently the behaviours that are more challenging. So, for example, behaviours that are louder, more dramatic, more disruptive, or more dangerous are often the behaviours that we are primed as individuals to respond to quicker, because again, it often indicates a safety need or again, a risk behaviour. So, as adults, if somebody is engaging in climbing on the table, for example, I'm more primed and more likely to respond to that behavior in a way that gives it attention potentially, rather than when somebody is sitting down quietly on their chair. So again, we're primed and we're more likely to pay attention to those behaviors. So you can see again how those more risky or more challenging behaviors can become quickly established, because we're more likely to respond to them in an immediate sense. And when we take all of that together, a lack of functional communication, so a lack of the ability to communicate your needs in a way that gets your needs met, is one of the contributors to the establishment of behaviours of concern, and also one that causes them to maintain over time as well. So additional deficits that can contribute to behaviours of concern then, in addition to our communication deficits and difficulties with waiting, There are other developmental tasks that children with additional needs and individuals with additional needs may not have achieved that can cause behaviours of concern to either emerge or maintain over time. The first is object permanence. So, this is understanding that things continue to exist even when we can't see them. So, a deficit in this concept of object permanence or in this skill of object permanence can cause distress when preferred people or things are not present. Theory of mind. So that's understanding that other people have perspectives, thoughts, and feelings that are different to our own. So, for example, if I'm feeling frustrated, I might anticipate that the other person is feeling frustrated too, because if I lack theory of mind or that skill isn't developed, then I think my feelings are the same as yours. Turn taking skills. So, this is the ability to have back and forth interactions with people that are mutually satisfying for both. And sharing. So, sharing, again, sharing perspectives or sharing toys or sharing items with other people and understanding that you might receive them back. Deficits in these areas can make it difficult for the individual to socialize and to meet social expectations that they are not aware of. And other people's behavior can seem arbitrary and unfair as a result of these additional deficits as well. So, our fourth topic, then, we're going to look at understanding the role of emotional regulation difficulties, again, in the emergence and maintenance of behaviours of concern. Understanding the role of emotional regulation. When we put all of these deficits and their knock on effects and implications together, we can start to see from the perspective of a child or adult with a disability how confusing, contradictory, or overwhelming the world may seem. As a result, this can cause very strong and very unpleasant emotions such as anxiety, frustration, anger, fear, and a sense of overwhelm. In a child or adult who has neither the communication skills to express and seek support with these feelings, nor the emotional regulation skills to manage these emotions on their own, these again can lead to the emergence and maintenance of behaviours of concern. Faced with these strong emotions, then, individuals will often either melt down. So, this is where they may engage in external behaviours of concern, such as crying, shouting, screaming, becoming physically aggressive towards others, throwing, hitting, or breaking items and things, or hurting themselves, often by slapping, biting, pinching themselves, banging their head, or throwing themselves to the ground. Or we might see more internalized behaviors in a sense of shutdown. So, this is where the individual might withdraw from others or from their environment, disengage from social or verbal interaction, or they may engage in repetitive or self stimulatory behaviors. So, again, these are all in response to the feelings of very strong emotions. These behaviours are distressing to witness, and we will usually do what we can to bring them to an end as quickly and as safely as possible. This can often mean that we inadvertently reinforce that behaviour, and the individual then learns this is an effective way to get their need met. Sometimes this can't be avoided, as the safety of everyone involved is the most important thing to think about at all times. But by paying attention to the kinds of situations that prompt these behaviours to occur, so looking at, specifically looking for, the kinds of situations that arise that lead to the emergence of that behaviour. And also by having an understanding of how skills or knowledge that the child doesn't have might be contributing to the behaviour. So looking at, are they able to communicate with me in this moment? Are they able to do what I'm asking them to do? When we're looking at both of those things, so looking at what's happening before the behavior occurs, and then also looking at it through the lens of what skills does the child not have or the adult not have to meet or to engage with the situation at hand, then we can start to change the world around the individual to support them a little bit better. And we can also look at identifying behaviors to teach the individual to get their needs met as well. So, what we're really looking at there is trying to identify triggers for the behavior and then also trying to identify what could I teach to replace the behavior of concern. So, our fifth topic then is looking at understanding triggers, setting events, and precursor behaviors. Triggers for behaviours of concern. A trigger is something that happens directly before a behaviour to trigger it. So this is something that we're looking at. The behaviour has happened, what happened immediately before that to trigger the emergence of that behaviour. Triggers are not necessarily bad events. Many of our daily behaviours have been triggered by something right before them. So somebody breaking a red traffic light, this may be a trigger to beep the horn. So if you're behind somebody and they've broken a traffic light, or you're in front of somebody, seeing this might trigger you to beep your horn to let them know that they were in the wrong. The phone ringing triggers our behaviour to answer it. A partner sighing loudly can trigger us to ask, is there something wrong? And when attempting to have a disagreement and being told to calm down, this is typically a trigger for an increase in frustration. When an individual doesn't have a strategy to respond to the trigger in an adaptive way, however, this can result in the emergence of behaviours of concern. So when a trigger is in the environment and the person doesn't have an alternative way of responding to that trigger, then behaviours of concern, again, may be more effective at getting their need met, so therefore might continue over time. Strategies for identifying triggers to behaviours of concern. So try to think of a behaviour of concern that you've experienced. Can you identify something that happened beforehand that may have triggered the behaviour? This might be something like asking an individual to do something that they really don't want to do. So we call this placing a demand. Again, if the person engages in behaviour of concern as a response to your demand, then their behaviour may have an escape function. So they might be engaging in that behaviour to try and avoid or escape from the demand that you have placed on them. Removing something that the individual wants to have. So again, if we go back to the iPad example, so the individual is playing happily with their iPad, and you come and you say, it's time to go here, you need to put the iPad away. Or it's time to go to bed, it's time to put the iPad away. They then immediately start crying and getting frustrated. And then as a result, they might get the iPad back. So again, that behavior might have a tangible function. So they might be engaging in that crying and frustrated behavior to communicate that need of, I want some more time. So again, if that becomes established, we can say that that has a tangible function for them. So they get access to a tangible item as a result of that behavior. A loud noise that gives the individual a fright, or asking the child to sit for longer than they are able. So this behavior may have an automatic or sensory function. So again, you might see it in situations if we're looking at the individual sitting for longer than they're able. Classroom environments would be a classic example of this, where again, internally, the individual or the child is not able to sit for that length of time, but that expectation is being put on them. So that's triggering their behavior to try and get movement and to negate that feeling internally of the buildup of frustration and have that sensory need of movement met. Seeing their favorite friend playing with somebody else. So again, another common one where a preferred person is sharing their attention with another person. And that you might shout out, or you might do something like jump up on a table or something like that, again, to try and get the attention back to you. So these are kind of behaviours that serve the function of getting your need for attention met. So continuing with our strategies for identifying triggers to behaviours of concern. One way that we can try to identify these triggers is to try to pay attention to what happens before the behaviour, what happens during the behaviour, and what happens afterwards. So we call these the ABCs of behaviour. The antecedents, what comes before the behaviour itself, and the consequences. So the consequences are what happens after the behaviour. Trying to keep a written record of these will help to identify patterns in triggers. So this is an example sheet of how we might track these antecedents, behaviours, and consequences across a number of different behavioural episodes. So ideally, when we're implementing these types of strategies and this type of monitoring and recording of behaviour, we're trying to do it consistently over a period of time to make sure that we have enough information to try and identify that pattern. So on the left-hand far left column, we'll see the time column with the date, the start time of the behavior and the end time of the behavior. So this is important to try and keep track of, because as we try to change behavior, we want to see, is the length of the behavioral episode also reducing? What happened before the behavior? So you try and explain, where were you? What were they doing, saying before the behavior occurred? What were you doing or saying before the behavior occurred? Was there anything else going on in the environment? Had anything noticeable happened earlier today or last night? And any other information that might be relevant. So when we're looking at the antecedent column there, what happened before the behavior, we're trying to explicitly identify, an example being, the child's friend took their toy and walked away. B, what behavior occurred? So we might have hitting, screaming, breaking things, and we're trying to be as explicit as possible when we're describing this behavior. So again, describing all of the behaviors that we might see within that episode. So it might be multiple behaviors, again, hitting, screaming, breaking things, throwing themselves on the floor, crying, and so on and so forth. So you really want to list everything that happened, and then see what happened after the behavior. So what did you do and say? What did the person do or say? Did they get something, get to do something, or get out of doing something? And what was that? And did anything else change in the environment as a result of their behavior? So back to that example of the child's friend taking the toy. Did they get the toy back as a result, or did they get offered something else from an adult that helped to kind of ameliorate that situation? So you're really trying to explain as explicitly as possible what happened before the behavior, what the behavior looked like, and what happened after the behavior. When you've identified these kind of common antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, so you've identified a little bit of a pattern. You've identified that over 5 episodes, it all had to do with something being taken from the individual. Then what you can do is you can try and make a checklist for that. So a checklist can be a more efficient way of recording these behavioral episodes, how frequently they're happening, and the length of time that they're happening for. And then as a result, you can try to identify any modifications that you're making to the antecedents in order to try and help that behavior become less frequent. So, for example, in the modification of setting events and antecedents, you might have, did you introduce a visual timer, a non-verbal reminder, a verbal reminder, or redirection? So these would be strategies that you're trying in order to try and reduce the frequency of the behaviors of concern. Then your antecedent, what happened just before the behavior occurred? So was the person alone? Were they with another person? Were they transitioning between activities? Were they asked to do a non-preferred activity? What did the behavior look like? Was it self-injurious behavior, seeking reassurance, throwing items, making verbal threats? And then what was the consequence? Were they ignored? Were they given some reassurance? Were they redirected to another activity? Or did they receive a different sensory item as a result? So again, with these checklists, what you're looking to do is to get a snapshot of what the incident itself was or what the behavioral episode was. So you're simply ticking what happened exactly before it, what behavior the individual engaged in, and the consequence that they received as a result of the behavior. And then continuing with our strategies for identifying triggers and behaviors of concern, once we can identify a trigger, we can then alter the environment in the future to try to remove these triggers that the individual can't yet cope with. So the trigger being needing a break from an activity, how we can support or again alter the environment to reduce the likelihood of the behavior happening in the future is to provide activity or movement breaks on a schedule of every 10 minutes. So what we might look at doing there is this person can't sit for very long. We've identified that about 20 minutes, 30 minutes is too much for them. So we're going to provide them with breaks more frequently to help them get that sensory need met. An instruction being given. So for example, please tidy up. So we might try and help the person with the activity that they're finding difficult. So if they find tidying up difficult, then what we might look at is starting the first step of that activity for them, or doing a couple of steps with them and really reducing the amount that they have to do. So reducing that demand down to something that's a bit more achievable for them and a bit less effortful for them. A trigger being the word no, we might try to amend our language. So using other words or other statements such as not right now, yes, later, to try and again get around having to use that word that triggers that behavior. And being required to wait. So, can we use items to support with waiting? So, visual supports and different types of visual timers can be very effective with helping individuals again to understand that passage of time, and helping to illustrate the passage of time so they know in a very concrete way how much time is left or how much time they have to wait. So when we're looking at waiting, oftentimes, again, when somebody doesn't understand the concept of time or hasn't developed that skill to wait, waiting and time can feel very abstract. So what we're trying to do is using items that make the abstract a lot more concrete. So our visual timers, visual countdowns, again, to try and visually concretely illustrate to the individual, this is what this means. So this is what 10 minutes is, and this is what the waiting period is. So it's something that they can refer to continuously, again, to help them understand what's expected of them. So looking at setting events for behaviours of concern as well, while we have our triggers, so triggers are things that we can usually identify that happen immediately before a behaviour. A setting event is something that happens in the background that makes us more likely to engage in behaviours of concern. So these are different to triggers, as they don't mean that the behaviour will definitely happen, but they can influence the likelihood of the behaviour occurring. So they can again increase somebody's likelihood to engage in behaviours of concern because their baseline isn't where it should be. Right? They're not at full baseline at that point. They're a little bit elevated. So their stress levels might be elevated a little bit more than is normal due to external factors. So, consider your own behavior. If I don't have coffee in the morning, for example, so if there's no coffee in my house, then I'm more likely to be irritable throughout the day because I'm experiencing a little bit more tiredness. If my morning has gone really well, then I'm more open to constructive feedback. However, if I haven't had my coffee and I've had, an incident on the road that morning, or somebody has been annoying me that morning, and I get some criticism from my manager, from a colleague, I might be more likely to get upset because, again, my baseline isn't where it should be. I'm a little bit elevated already. My stress is already elevated. So when we're looking at the broader perspective of somebody's day and what's going on in their lives at that time, so these setting events really are something that's happening in the behavior that elevate us a little bit and increase the likelihood that we're likely to get triggered a little bit easier. So when we're looking at strategies for identifying setting events for behaviours of concern, consider the things that the individual struggles with in general. So communicating, knowing what to expect, knowing what is expected of them, knowing when things will happen, knowing how to manage their emotions and feelings in their bodies, knowing how to do things for themselves. So having difficulties or deficits with any of these creates a setting event already, where the individual is more likely to have a bad response or a heightened response to a trigger. Also consider the things that the individual might be struggling with right now. Are they sick, hungry, bored, too hot or too cold, excited? So these are things that make triggers less tolerable for all of us. And we see that with individuals with communication difficulties, that if they're not able to tell us that we're sick, oftentimes their behaviour and the occurrence and emergence or increase in frequency of behaviours of concern communicates that they are unwell. It's more likely that we will see behaviours of concern around times that the individual is not feeling well, that they're coming down with something or that they're experiencing something internally that is giving them pain. So, when we're looking at strategies for reducing setting events to behaviours of concern, when we can identify the setting events, we can then try to alter the environment in the present and in the future to remove these triggers that the individual can't yet cope with. So, if we're looking at physically uncomfortable, so these are setting events such as somebody feels sick, tired, hungry, too hot or too cold. We can try and support through resolving the problem causing the discomfort and to try to remove triggers until the child is a bit more comfortable. So when we're looking at the setting event of hunger, for example, what we might try to do is provide somebody with a small snack in the lead up to their dinner. So, for example, if they're more likely to engage in behaviours of concern between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock, we might try to offer a small snack at 3:30 in order to help them lessen the discomfort of feeling hungry, and help tide them over until dinner time at 6 o'clock, and see the impact that might have on the frequency of their behaviours. For strong emotions, so somebody experiencing really strong emotions, we can try and support self-regulation. So we might try and help the individual understand the emotion and then also model different grounding activities such as progressive muscle relaxation or guided breathing activities. Not being able to communicate effectively as a setting event, what we might try to do is teach somebody how to use alternative communication strategies. So, using pictures, body language, gestures, pointing, or choice making as an alternative to that behavior. Not knowing what to expect or what is expected, we can use things like social stories or visual supports to prepare the individual for what will happen and how they should behave. Not knowing when things will happen, using things like visual schedules, calendars, countdown timers, and so on and so forth to help the individual again understand in a concrete way the passage of time. And not being able to do things for themselves, what we might try to do is help the individual as much as is needed, but consider teaching them to reduce this in the future. So consider using things like prompting in order to help them develop these skills for themselves. Strategies for identifying cursors to behaviours of concern. So, precursor behaviours are warning signs. So, these occur before a behaviour of concern and indicate that something is wrong. These are individual to each person, and these are behaviours, again, that the person engages in before a behaviour of concern. How do we identify? If we know the warning signs, then we can intervene at this stage without waiting for behaviour to escalate. So, again, it's all about observing the individual, getting to know them, trying to understand their behaviour, and trying to observe what might happen in the lead up to these behaviours of concern. So, strategies for identifying precursors to behaviours that challenge them. Continuing with this, if we consider our own precursor behaviours, when we look at the car, we typically raise our voice or comment on the person's poor driving prior to beeping the horn. Those of us with verbal abilities typically state our frustrations before further escalating to other behaviours of concern. So look at the examples below. A precursor being hands starting to shake. The behaviour of concern that we might see is shouting at their friend. Shouting "stop it" might escalate again in terms of behaviours of concern to hitting a sibling. So trying to identify these precursors can help us to intervene at that earlier stage rather than things escalating to the behaviour of concern. Okay, so to summarize part one of this webinar, the functions of an individual's behaviour, we went through some helpful information about the functions of behaviour. We talked about the role of communication difficulties in relation to behaviours of concern, as well as the role of emotional regulation difficulties in behaviours of concern. And we also explored some strategies for identifying triggers, precursors, and setting events of behaviours of concern. Join me in the next part two, to review some practical proactive strategies to reduce the need for behaviours of concern and things that can help when the individual you support is emotionally and behaviourally dysregulated. We will also focus on discussing strategies for recognising early warning signs for behaviours of concern and ways in which we can prompt alternative behaviours that will meet the same function in a safer or more appropriate way. So thank you for your time and attention during today's webinar. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope to see you back in part two.